Pledge. Inflexibility as a stratagem. In 1519 the Spanish conqueror Hernán Cortés reached the coast of Mexico from Cuba. He summarily declared Mexico a Spanish colony, and himself the governor. He then destroyed his ship, eliminating any chance of return for himself and his men. From an economic perspective, Cortés's decision makes no sense. Why exclude the possibility of returning right from square one? Why exclude alternatives? One of the most important principles of economics, after all, is that the more options you have, the better. So why did Cortés abandon his freedom of choice? 2 or 3 times a year, I meet the CEO of a major international corporation at various obligatory dinners to which we've both been invited. For years I've found it striking that he always turns down dessert. Until recently, I considered his behavior illogical and ascetic. Why exclude the sweet option on principle? Why not decide on a case-by-case basis? Why not make his decision dependent on how much he weighs, how filling the main course was, or how tempting the dessert looks? A blanket refusal of pudding may be a less dramatic decision than barring your return home, but at first glance they both seem unnecessary. One of the world's most important experts on management is Clayton Christensen, the Harvard professor known for his international bestseller The Innovator's Dilemma. A committed Mormon, Christensen leads his life according to pledges, an old term for a promise one cannot break. If pledge sounds too fusty, call it absolute commitment. I'm a fan of the older term, because these days commitment is subject to inflation and often used insincerely. Example: we are committed to improving the state of the world. Only an individual, not an organization, can make such a pledge. In his younger years, Christensen saw many managers sacrifice the first stage of their lives to their careers so that they could dedicate the second half, by now financially independent, to their families, only to discover that their families had either fallen apart or long since flown the coop. So Christensen made a pledge, promising God not to work at the weekends and to eat dinner at home with his family on weeknights. Sometimes, this meant he'd get to work at 3 in the morning. When I first heard this, I found Christensen's behavior irrational, obstinate, and uneconomical. Why be so inflexible? Why not decide on a case-by-case basis? Sometimes you simply have to work on the weekend, and then you can make up for it by working a bit less on Monday and Tuesday. Flexibility is an asset, surely, especially at a time when everything is in flux. Today I have a different perspective. When it comes to important issues, flexibility isn't an advantage, it's a trap. Cortés, the dessert-averse CEO, and Clayton Christensen, what all three of them have in common is that they use radical inflexibility to reach long-term goals that would be unrealizable if their behavior were more flexible. How so? 2 reasons. First, constantly having to make new decisions situation by situation saps your willpower. Decision fatigue is the technical term for this. A brain exhausted by decision-making will plump for the most convenient option, which more often than not is also the worst one. This is why pledges make so much sense. Once you've pledged something, you don't then have to weigh up the pros and cons each and every time you're faced with a decision. It's already been made for you, saving you mental energy. The second reason inflexibility is so valuable has to do with reputation. By being consistent on certain topics, you signal where you stand and establish the areas where there's no room for negotiation. You communicate self-mastery, making yourself less vulnerable to attack. Mutual deterrents during the Cold War were based largely on this effect. The USA and the USSR both knew that a nuclear strike would mean instant retaliation. No deliberation, no situational weighing up of pros and cons. The decision for or against the red button had already been taken. Pressing it first simply wasn't an option. What applies to nations applies equally to you. If you lead a life consistent with your pledges, whatever those look like, people will gradually start to leave you in peace. Legendary investor Warren Buffett, for instance, refuses on principle to negotiate. If you want to sell him your company, you've got exactly one shot. You can make precisely one offer. Buffett will either buy the company at the price you suggest, or he won't buy it at all. If it's too high, there's no point lowering it. A no is a no, and everybody realizes that. Buffett has acquired such a reputation for inflexibility that he's now guaranteed to be offered the best deal right from the word go, without wasting any time on haggling. Commitments, pledges, unconditional principles. It sounds simple, but it's not. Say you're driving a truck full of dynamite down a ramrod straight, single-lane road. Another truck is coming toward you, also loaded with dynamite. Who swerves first? If you can convince the other driver that you've made the stronger commitment, you'll win. In other words, the other driver will swerve first, assuming he's acting rationally. If, for example, you can convince the other driver that your steering wheel is locked and you've thrown the key out of the window, you're signaling an extremely strong commitment. That's how strong, believable, and radical your pledges have to be in order for your signals to be effective. So say goodbye to the cult of flexibility. Flexibility makes you unhappy and tired, and it distracts you from your goals. Chain yourself to your pledges. Uncompromisingly. It's easier to stick to your pledges 100% of the time rather than 99%.